Welcome to Australian Hunger. I am your host, Ben. On today's show, I've got an interview with Anaal Nathrakh, Dave Hunt, their vocalist. They're going to be touring Australia next month, but all that in a little bit. Before then, I want to get to an article that I saw. Back to Formula. So, Louder, which is like some weird part of Metal Hammer, I don't quite get it, but Louder Sound, they had an article about why Behemoth's The Satanist is the greatest extreme metal album of the 21st century. It's by a guy who I respect, Dale Patterson, but I find this kind of article incredibly wrong-headed for a bunch of reasons. Firstly, the idea that there is some sort of you can rank. I can understand if there's some sort of audience poll, fine. There's some sort of hey, here's some of the amazing albums of the 21st century, and you've got 100, fine. But to pick one, one extreme metal album and say, yep, that's it, that's the album we've got, it seems very, very weird to me. And especially the fact that you're saying the 21st century, and this is nitpicky, but I think it's actually quite relevant. The 21st century has not been completed. It is not even a fifth completed. It's not completed its 20th year. So that's kind of a problem. I wouldn't say... I'd be a bit hesitant to release an album, the greatest of the 21st century, when it was not yet elapsed or even close to elapsing. So that's it's funny. That was actually a riff that a friend and I did on one of our first radio shows. That's taken me back. But my final point is, The Satanist is a good album. It's a great album. It's an amazing album. But with so many of these things, it's ultimately up to taste whether you like that kind of blackened death metal. For someone who likes extreme doom, that's not going to be it. And I always find these kind of rankings of not just here's a really cool album or here's an album I really like, but the greatest album. I think those kind of sort of broad declarations are just kind of, I think, part of the problem, and it's something we all experience. We all are convinced that our musical taste is in some way objective, where everyone else is subjective or inferior. I think to go beyond stating that an album has good attributes, and an album is widely liked, an album is personally liked, I think that is always overstating it, and it's not recognising that there's something deeper at work, that an album's characteristics that appeal to us are not universal. And even if we can say that they do something better than almost all other bands, I think it takes music in a way that I think we really need to get away from. We really need to depart from this kind of interpretation of music as some sort of hierarchy, particularly one which you yourself can set in order. If you want to have a poll, that's fine. I think that's always good to get a flavour of what people are thirsting after in a particular moment. But this kind of approach, I think it's silly, and I just don't think it's the right one. You can have something about extreme metal, one of extreme metals, because they've got in the subtitle. Behemoth's masterpiece not only marks Nagal's return from the brink, it serves as extreme metal's crowning achievement. If you want to say it's Behemoth's masterpiece, alright, I can get that. If you want to say that it's one of extreme metal's crowning achievements, I'll even grant that. But to say that it is the singular is, I think, a little bit absurd. And it also doesn't recognise the fact that there have been so many amazing albums in the extreme metal category released over the last 19 years, nearly coming up to 20. And I would definitely not feel comfortable stating any particular one as the greatest. I definitely wouldn't feel comfortable stating that the Satanist in particular is the greatest. So, I don't know, I think that's a really odd way to put stuff. I talked to Dave Hunt of Anaal Nathrakh. They released an album last year, a new kind of horror, and they're actually touring Australia, which is interesting. I talk a little bit about it in the interview, but I didn't realise how much they were touring, because you always go through this process of getting into a band and you kind of learn, depending on how much you're into them, you will look up stuff about them. And I was keen on Anaal Nathrakh. They were an interesting band. They're still quite an interesting band. And I looked them up, and it turned out that they didn't tour, basically. They did sort of once-off shows. I think they played a couple of festivals. But back when I was getting into them, around the time of In the Constellation, they were not doing many shows. 2009, I think it was. Aging me. But they've, in the last, I think it's 5 years, they've really changed it up. They've realised that, hey, people can actually play our music. And I think when they say play our music, they kind of mean the drums, because they've got a pretty full-on drum machine in their music. And yeah, but that's kind of a really cool thing that they've been able to bring this madness to the world in these various tours. And this is their first time an Australian tour. They actually played at MoFo a year or two ago, but this is their first time playing a tour. They're going to be in Sydney at the Crowbar on March 7th, Melbourne at Max Watts on March 8th, and in Brisbane at the Crowbar on March 9th. This is Dave Hunt of Anaal Nathrakh. So let's start off talking a little bit about the upcoming tour. So this is your first headline tour for Australia. Give us a bit of an idea of kind of what an Anaal Nathrakh show looks like. What kind of songs you're going to be playing? Like, what are you pulling out from your discography and your new stuff? How is that all going to work?
We usually try to have a fair cross section of songs. I mean, obviously we've put out a few records by now, so it can be a bit tricky to play everything that, you know, might be one person's favourite song or something like that. But we try to make sure we have a decent selection, including, you know, some older stuff, some newer stuff, all of that kind of thing. So we don't. I mean, some bands you'll see, they tend to play, you know, 10 songs off the new album and then throw an old one in or something, and that's not really what we do. And more generally, I think we tend to have a fairly down-to-earth approach to this kind of stuff. I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, walking around on stilts or, you know, covering yourself in various fluids or whatever it is that you want to do, but that's not really our style. It's more of a sort of punky sort of kind of thing we go for. Where legal, we would tend to encourage stage diving. Obviously, some places it's not legal, so, well, we wouldn't say anything about that. And aside from that, anything can happen, really. I mean, we were lucky enough to play in Australia once before at the Dark Mofo Festival in Tasmania, and that seemed to go pretty well. We had a blind guy stage diving, which was kind of cool, and for some reason we had some guys on stage with their dicks out. Don't really know why that happened, but, you know, anything goes as far as we're concerned.
In terms of you sort of more personally, like, when you're up there performing, what is it you're trying to do? What is it that for you you're trying to do which makes, I don't know, in the part that you play, a successful gig? I
suppose that's a slightly more complicated question to answer than you might think. I mean, first and foremost, I'm not particularly an exhibitionist, which may sound a strange thing, given what I sometimes find myself doing. So one of the things I'm trying to do primarily is live up to the occasion. You know, there is a degree of responsibility that you bear, I think, if people have come to see you, and you want to make sure that it's justified. So yeah, first of all, don't be shit. It's one of the things you're certainly aiming for. I tend to think of performance. I mean, that sounds a bit of a sort of pretentious way of putting it, but I tend to think of performance in terms of the embodying something. You should, or rather, I would try to get the feel of the songs, so present in the way that I felt at the time that you can communicate that to an audience, which is a slightly different thing. Some people sort of stand there and telegraph. They present things as obviously as possible, and don't necessarily feel it themselves. Whereas I would tend to go more for you've got to mean it. And I suppose finally, there's a small extent. I wouldn't want to try and overdo it, but there's a small extent of being sort of like a ringmaster or something like that. You want to point people in the right direction and try and give a fluency and a momentum to proceedings. But that varies show to show. You got to take it as it is. But basically, it's balls out, doing your absolute level best and not being satisfied with anything less than that. I think that's probably the most direct answer.
Now, when I first got into you guys, is when Into the Constellation came out, you were sort of notable in bands that you were a studio band, but you also played a couple of shows live. That's changed since. You're obviously touring Australia, you're touring Japan, you're touring, I think, Europe at some stage. Has that had any effect on the band, the way you go about things, touring far more than you ever did, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so?
No, I don't think it has really. Obviously, from a musical point of view, you might expect that we write songs differently so that they're easier to play live or something like that, and we certainly don't do that. When we're doing an album, it has to be the best album that we can make. And then when we come to play live, well, that's just a new challenge, how to turn that material into something that works live. So we don't compromise on that. And in terms of the interpersonal dynamics, that side of things, no, I don't think it really changes anything. I mean, we probably saw, even though we play a bit more nowadays, it's not like we're, Metallica. We don't go out on tour for 2.5 years at a stretch or anything like that. And we probably saw more of each other before we started playing live than we do now outside of shows, because Mick lived up the road, whereas now he lives in California. So, it's the more often we play, it's more of an opportunity to meet up as much as anything else. And yeah, I don't think really playing live has changed our perspective on anything at all. It's something that we do, but we always did it. So yeah, no, we are the same people that we were, regardless of being lucky enough. I mean, we appreciate the opportunities that we've had, but aside from that, we're the same as we always were, I think.
To touch briefly on the album, from your side of things, Mick obviously being the guitarist, he does production for both Anaal Nathrakh and other bands. So he has a large responsibility in it. When do you come into the process?
It's a bit of a weird one, actually, because we sort of don't overlap in what we do. If I've got an idea for a sound or a riff or something like that, then I'll talk to Mick about it, and he'll listen. But I won't go, here's a song I've written, Mick, you have to put this on the album or anything like that. He's better at that kind of thing, and that's that just makes sense. In the same way that he wouldn't do the same for vocals. But we do tend, when an album's like in the nascent stages, when it's when it's just becoming a bit more than a twinkle in our eyes, we will tend to start having conversations then about sort of general aesthetic matters, an overall feel to maybe a specific piece of art or thing in history or book or something that gives some flavour, some kind of foundational direction that, we don't then necessarily stick to it, but it percolates through what we then come up with. So that is actually a bit collaborative right at the start. But then once Mick properly gets into writing songs and I'm properly into compiling lyric ideas and all of that kind of stuff, it's actually very separate. So, I mean, it varies to an extent, but for this album, for A New Kind of Horror, when I went to vocals, I hadn't heard any of the songs. It was the first time I heard them, actually in the control room of the studio. But that's a pretty weird way to work, but it works for us. We enjoy the spontaneity and the directness of being able to react to the music. That I think that comes out in the finished album. So yeah, it wouldn't work for a lot of people, but that's the way we like it.
Taking the next step from that, you're presented with a piece of music which you're to add your component to it. What is your approach like? How do you feel out where there are parts that you can add to, that there are particular styles of vocals that you should add in particular places? Like, how does that work for you?
It's very instinctive. Pretty much everything we do is sort of gut based. So I maintain like a great big list, a document of all the ideas and bits of lyrics and stuff like that I've got. And then when we come to record, it's a matter of, okay, which song are we going to do? Okay, this song, play it a couple of times, get a feel for it, and that the feel of the music will inform the choices that I make from the ideas that I've got and everything. And then I wrap the ideas around the music that's there based on what feels like the most appropriate thing for that piece of music. And the same goes with at a more microscopic sort of level, the particular vocal style on a particular part of a riff or something like that. It's very much a matter of listening to it and responding to it, getting the thing that feels right given that piece of music and given the context of the rest of the song. And like I say, very instinctual. So there'll be times when the very first time it goes through, I can immediately hear the vocal in my head straight away. And it's, you just blurt it out almost. It goes on very easily, you might say. But there can be other times when, we're trying to think, well, we already did that on this bit of this song and that didn't sound quite right or something. And then it will be, aha, I've got it. You sit there trying to grind it out for a while, but then, nah, I've got it. And I'll just say to Mick, right, record this. And he won't know what I'm going to do, but usually he agrees that it was the right thing once it's done. So we try to keep it spontaneous because that's how I think it suits best. If you go in with too many preconceived ideas of what you're going to do, you become rigid, you become inflexible, and I don't think that serves the listener very well. I don't think it conduces to the best music you can make. The best music you can make should be guided by feeling, I think, because that's the way music works in the listener.
Talking more generally about your vocal styles, for me, you're one of the more interesting people performing in, that kind of vocally in extreme metal, because there's so many just different approaches and so many subtle things that you do, and there's always sort of the opportunity to be surprised by things, which I don't think is a thing that a lot of people do, unfortunately. Talk a little bit about why there's such a kind of breadth of things that you're interested in putting on various pieces of music.
It's difficult to know. To be honest, I think that characteristic sort of carries through most things with both of us, actually. We're quite open-minded, broad-minded, just as people. We're open to finding out what's out there kind of thing, rather than always wanting to stick to what we know. So, to take music and as an example, we're constantly listening to all manner of stuff, a really wide variety of things. For most of the past 12 months or so, as far as I'm aware, Mick's mostly listened to Elvis. He got really madly into Elvis for some reason. We both share an interest in certain kinds of electronic music. I listen to a lot of classical stuff. It's not going, oh God, aren't we eclectic and clever and all that kind of stuff. It's just we're open to different things. And in terms of metal and stuff like that, We've always been omnivorous. The mixed primary background in that kind of stuff is what I would call crust punk. Extreme noise terror, and he loves old napalm and stuff like that. And mine's probably a bit more, death metal based when I was in my teens and that. And we both had a passion for black metal at the time, and we both like King Diamond and all of that. So why say to yourself, I can be one thing and only this one thing? If you have a particular talent for one thing and you can't do anything else particularly well, okay, that's understandable. But as long as you can, be free to experiment and some of it works, and you can double down on the best parts and all of that kind of stuff, then it seems that being open-minded is natural to us, and it gives you a lot more different colours, different atmospheres, different ideas that you can play with than you would have if you stuck to one style. So it's just natural to us to do it the way we do.
You mentioned sort of being attracted to death metal when you were younger. Like, in terms of extreme metal more broadly, like what was it attracted you to it in the beginning? Has that changed as you sort of matured? Released 10 records, but specifically with Anaal Nathrakh. Has that changed over that period of time?
The reason I started listening to stuff like that was because I had a sound in my head. I'd never heard music that sounded like that, or anything extreme. I was a kid. I think when I was a properly little kid, I remembered Iron Maiden were in the charts or something like that, and that was about as close as I got. But I had a sound in my head for some reason from somewhere, and I went out looking for music that sounded like it. And the first thing I came across that started, it wasn't exactly right, but that started to be in the right kind of direction. There used to be a T-shirt shop in Birmingham called Alive, if I remember rightly, which was kind of ironic because it sold death metal T-shirts most of the time. And I walked into there, and they were playing, I think it was Deicide or something like that. I didn't recognise it at the time, but thinking back, it sounds something along those lines. And that was the first time I thought, that's actually not far off the sound in my head. So that was what attracted me to that. And then that was what kept me going on past death metal. The reason I ended up listening to Masona or Whitehouse or something like that was that was the final 10% that was lacking in extreme metal to me. So I don't know how typical that is. I don't know what other people's reasons for getting into that kind of stuff would be, but it made perfect sense to me because I already knew what it was before I heard it.
One last question before I let you go. Is there anything You've been listening to, watching, reading recently?
Oh, yeah. Lots of stuff, to be honest. One thing that I'm looking forward to coming out soon is the new Bergraven album. That's a little known, like, one man. Well, it's two man actually, I think, but sort of melancholic black metal project from a guy I met in Sweden, and he's not had a new album for like 10 years or something, and that's coming out soon. And other than that, I managed to get a box set of Decca classical music stuff, and I've been working my way through that. So listening to most recently to the Chopin solo piano stuff, which has been amazing. And yeah, you wouldn't get it. Do you get BBC stuff over there, TV?
We do, but it's behind the sort of paywall of you have to pay for it, which only certain people have. That's
a shame because there's being from Birmingham, it's kind of looked down upon culturally speaking by a lot of people in the rest of the country. And there's a sitcom set in Birmingham called Citizen Khan on the BBC, and it's utterly fucking crap. it's to me anyway. Maybe I'm the wrong audience for it, but to me it seems racist and really unpleasant. But there's an antidote to that that's been on BBC Three lately called Man Like Mabeen, which is really down to earth comedy that reflects, the background of people like me quite accurately. So that's been kind of fun. So there you go. Yeah, they're not necessarily normal recommendations that you might get, but that's been keeping me going.
Thanks to Dave Hunt from Anaal Nathrakh for chatting with me. Before I let you go, I want to make a recommendation. This is a band which I came across from their first album, Air, and they're really doing a unique thing in a particular way. So one of my favourite things is, like, it can vary, but it's like shoegaze, post-rock, alternative rock, combined with black metal. The bands that do that, in particular Alcest, quite a few others, a lot of them are not particularly well known. It's kind of a niche genre which Alcest in particular has managed to kind of achieve some level of stardom out of. I love just about any album that I can get my hands on that play in that style, and I think I actually will be making a few recommendations that bear that out over the next few weeks, but that's neither here nor there. This is a little bit separate to that. So Astronoid include like that, I don't know if I want to say atmospheric, I don't know if I want to say like positive riffing, I don't know if I want to say, like, they can kind of combine those ideas. I don't know how exactly to describe it, because I think post-metal, post-rock probably doesn't adequately describe it, but I think the most particular thing about it is the vocals. They have a very shoegazy tone, a breathy, airy tone to them, something which you basically don't find in heavy metal, and particularly not heavy metal in this form. I think maybe the only real comparisons are some of those like Alcest and some of those other kind of black shoegazy bands, and also Jesu, Justin Broderick's project might be also kind of something you can compare it to, because he has that vibe, but in a drone doomy approach. So what I'm getting to is Astronoid have those kind of aspects, but are playing in more of a straightforward, I think they've called it dream thrash, but I don't know if thrash necessarily covers it, but it's really interesting stuff, and it's different to just about anything you'll listen to without being avant-garde, without being just ridiculously over the head. I can't be bothered going back and listening to their first album, but it almost sort of struck me that maybe the novelty's worn off for me a little bit. Maybe it's not quite as fresh as the first album felt, and I'd be interested to see if anyone else has any kind of opinions on that. But if you have not listened to Astronoid, I think regardless of whether you like it or not, I think it's well worth a listen, just purely because of its difference. You know, a lot of bands in the black metal category, I think, do it a lot better, just because the style meshes quite more thoroughly. The hazy guitars and the breathy vocals, they kind of mix a lot better than the more like substantive, like there's something there kind of riffing. But regardless, you should definitely give this album a listen, just because it's different, if nothing else, and it's enjoyable. I'm just not sure if it's enjoyable as fresh as the first. But that's Astronoid, their self-titled album. That's a big no-no. Don't do that, Astronoid. Bad. You only get one self-titled album, that's your first, otherwise you've lost it. Anyway, that's just one of my aesthetic preferences. Thanks so much for listening. I've got a bunch of interviews coming up, so I think I've more or less I feel so I hit a little bit of a dry spell, and I think I've kind of cleared that, because I basically realised that the previous state of getting so many bands responding to me in a kind of timely fashion, I might need to be a little bit more proactive than that, because not all bands are going to do that. But we'll see how it goes. I've got 2 others recorded, 2 others scheduled, so at least for the next few weeks, I should be pretty good, and I've got quite a good list of other bands I want to talk to as well. But until then, if you've got any questions, comments, if you're in a band and you're interested in an interview, let me know. You can email me, australianhunger@gmail.com, or you can hit me up on various social media platforms at AusHunger, that's AUS Hunger. Until later this week, bye.